I am Joshua Phillip, Senior Investigative Reporter with the Epoch Times, also the host of Crossroads, which is one of our new shows.
How do you see Trump's policy towards China? Pressuring in the trade deal. Now he struck a deal, phase one deal with China. Do you think the tariffs worked really wonderfully? How do you see this whole trade situation?
Now, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, there's two ways they maintain power over their people. One is through fear, and the other is through profit. And so, for the Chinese Communist Party, basically, as long as the people are more afraid of the party itself than they are of they're having a desire to change the system, a desire to move towards something they see as maybe making a better life for themselves, then the Chinese Communist Party is relatively stable. And the other side of that is the pensions, it's the profits, it's the say, state capitalist system they've instituted where people believe they can have some semblance of a decent life. Both of those are being destabilized now. When it came to the trade war and what Trump was doing, I thought it was extremely effective because it was making it so that the Chinese Communist Party's systems of economic theft were no longer financially viable. One, its systems of manipulating U.S. businesses into being forced to hand over their intellectual property when doing business in China was no longer possible. It meant that when China played financial games and made trade deals where the U.S. loses out, it could no longer play those kinds of games. Trump rolled back the trade deals. He rolled back a lot of the, ways they were stealing money and made it so that the tariffs would give us back the money they'd stolen from us. Of course, the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy are deeply intertwined. A lot of our manufacturing takes place in China, and so obviously some businesses did get hurt by this. The actual impact on the consumers was so tiny that it was almost not noticeable. And the reason for that is because companies, if they have to cut prices, if they have to raise prices too much, they just go manufacture somewhere else. And so then that's an important piece of this. When businesses are pulling out of China, right? So when businesses are getting hit financially in China, when it's no longer financially viable to stay in China, they go to Mexico, they go to Thailand, they go to Cambodia, they go to all these different countries that can get the same price of manufacturing or lower without all the tyrannical systems in place to impede them in those efforts. And so that is going to be where I think we see part of the long game when it comes to what Trump is doing, because a lot of businesses are pulling out of China. And at the same time, China now has the coronavirus. They have the Hong Kong protests. They have the landslide victory against the interests of the Chinese Communist Party in Taiwan. These are all things that are making the Chinese people begin to question the legitimacy of the party itself. The Communist Party itself is extremely concerned right now about whether it can maintain control over the system. And the Chinese people, with the coronavirus especially, are starting to question whether the form of government, where they've handed over all their rights for the semblance of, peace and security, is actually capable of making better decisions than they are, which is what it's been telling them for the last 70 years.
Do you think the rise of socialism, we see it with Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side, that he's winning a lot of states. Seems like he might get the nomination. We don't know yet. Do you think the rise of socialism in America has something to do with China? Was it did China propagandize a little bit?
Yes and no. Now, with China, they're talking about socialism with Chinese characteristics. They're talking about the Chinese model, the China model of socialism. That is a totalitarian system that basically controls every part of every individual's life. They have high-tech systems for this, like the social credit system, things that monitor your every action, your every connection, your every purchase, and give you a society rating based on that. And your rating as a citizen is going to determine your freedom or oppression in the society. They have different ways of censoring the internet. They have different ways of controlling the media. They have different ways of controlling businesses. And they are exporting that model through their One Belt, One Road initiative when they go to other countries and start building infrastructure. Now, the China model is not socialism as a lot of socialists in America envision it, because where is the wealth distribution in China? Where are the benefits that we believe socialism brings? You don't really have them. A lot of times those are the things, the carrots dangled in front of people as they're led down the path toward tyrannical government that socialism represents. They stop functioning after a certain point, and they've long ago stopped functioning in China. When it comes to U.S. support for the China model of socialism, ironically, a lot of it's being done through big business. It's being done through government corruption. It's being done through academia. It's being done through student groups that get infiltrated or are directly controlled, such as the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, which take money and leadership from the Chinese consulates. It is a system that is not necessarily right or left according to U.S. definitions, but it's a system that in every way represents socialism. When it comes to Bernie Sanders, here's the reality of socialism in America. It is on the upswing in terms of youth and popular culture as far as the mainstream media are telling us. But it is incapable of becoming something that could actually win a presidential election. And I think even the Democrats understand that. They do not want Bernie to be the front runner. They know that Bernie might get the majority, which is terrifying them, because they know that if he gets the majority, they're going to lose. And so socialism is dying when it comes down to it. Maybe Bernie will get 30% of the Democrat vote, roughly. Maybe some people will go over to him from the other groups. If they push him out, where are those people going to go? Well, 2016, a lot of the would-be Bernie voters end up voting for Trump because they felt burned. I mean, pun not intended. They felt burned by what the Democratic Party did to them. And so they're in a very difficult situation. Socialism will not win. The Democrats know socialism will not win. And they're trying to deal with the Bernie problem, I guess we could call it, within the Democratic Party because they know that he cannot win.
Do you think America brought this problem unto itself? For instance, outsourcing all the factories, in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all those factories to China or Mexico, and that's why the disparity between the haves and the do not have become so widened. And most people didn't invest in stocks, so they couldn't enjoy this boom or anything. Do you think America brought it to itself? I'm talking about former governments, former administrations, not particularly the Trump administration.
Now, when it comes to China and American big business, they have absolutely brought this upon themselves, and they did the same thing with the Soviets. And this is where a lot of, I think, socialists get confused, and a lot of conservatives too get confused, in my opinion, because they draw this hard line between socialism and big business. Socialism does not get rid of big business. What socialist regime got rid of big business, other than maybe Pol Pot in Cambodia, where they were sending people to the countryside and murdering them in the countryside in the killing fields? None of them did. They all maintained this state capitalist monopoly. They all maintained the factories. They all maintained the big businesses. Lenin, when he took power, he wrote a big, open letter to the public saying, how can we advance towards communism if we fear the stage of socialism? And he understood that socialism meant government controlling every single part of the society, every part of your lives. The state capitalist monopoly, as he described it. And so businesses understand that big businesses understand that socialism benefits them because it means that they can kill off the competition. It means that the middle and low-end, companies are no longer able to compete because you have state subsidies keeping up all the big businesses and keeping them all afloat. There's no such thing as competition anymore. They can do whatever they want. They can hike up prices as much as they want. They are subsidized by taxpayers. They can undercut competitors. They can put people out of business, which is notably what the Chinese Communist Party is doing a lot when it goes abroad and makes deals with the One Belt, One Road initiative. They're selling below cost and they're putting other companies out of business. That's socialism. Big business and socialism work hand in hand. And so in my opinion, these companies, they've sold their souls. They've sold out the country that they are from. They've sold out the people they represent. And they're very much just as guilty, in my opinion.
You know about California Senator Dianne Feinstein? One of her deputies turned out to be pretty much a Chinese spy. Are you familiar with that?
Familiar, yeah.
How come the media is not all over this kind of situation? They were crazy about Trump colluding with Russia, and then Trump being a Putin puppet, which was a complete hoax. It turned out to be a complete hoax, but they're still pulling that narrative with New York Times running a season 2 version of Russia collusion. What's your takeaway about this situation, about Dianne Feinstein?
In my opinion, it is a serious concern that Dianne Feinstein had a Chinese Communist Party spy working for her.
For 30 years, right?
For 30 years. But at the same time, this absolutely did not surprise me. What surprises me is that this is not being called on at a much broader level. The Chinese, now Mike Pompeo just came out and said that the Chinese Communist Party, through its United Front system, has a database of every single U.S. governor. And it talks about not just who they are and what they stand for, but also what their stances are on China. We just saw the Chinese, five state-run Chinese news outlets get called out and labeled as foreign missions of the Chinese Communist Party under the State Department. This is not foreign agents, this is foreign missions, which means that they're basically branches of the Chinese Communist Party itself. Now, on one of those media was China Daily. China Daily runs China Watch. China Watch publishes direct propaganda paid in something like 30 U.S. publications. New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, you name it. So, in other words, we have a foreign government able to pay U.S. news outlets to publish its propaganda directly and delivered to the homes of Americans. We have the Chinese Communist Party monitoring and keeping tabs on these different governors and their beliefs and, say, opinions of the Chinese Communist Party. I've known for years, and I've written about it, the Chinese Communist Party invites every single U.S. government official down to the county level, down to little, local council members on trips back to China. Every political group that has any semblance of influence gets invited back to China on these propaganda tours where they're indoctrinated with all the Chinese Communist Party's narratives. They do this in the academic institutions. They have the Torch program. They have the 973 program, the 211 program. We've heard recently about the 1,000 Talents program. They have tons of programs like this, and they're targeting our academic institutions. They target our think tanks. They target our media. They target student groups. I've exposed since 2008 the United Front Work Department, which is how the Chinese Communist Party controls Chinese communities and uses strong-arm tactics. There are people on American soil who do not feel the protection of the U.S. government. They can be threatened to be killed by the Chinese Communist Party on American soil. They run prostitution rings, they run human trafficking rings, they run drug rings, and they operate in the open. If you go on the Chinese consulate website in New York right now, you will see that the United Front is listed as one of their foreign missions. Also listed on there is the Liaison Department. The Liaison Department is under the General Political Department. That is their political warfare department. The Chinese Communist Party is openly waging political war on the United States. What was it? The Project 2049 Institute had a great report on this, talking about what that department does. We heard all this nonsense about, some legitimacy. Russia trying to interfere with our elections. The Chinese Communist Party has an entire military department focused on political warfare, operating openly in the United States, tied in with the United Front, tied in with organizations we know are operating in the U.S., and tied in with organizations we know a huge number of politicians, news outlets, academics, and think tanks have connections with. Huge issue, in my opinion.
Do you think the South Korean President Moon Jae-in is facing criticism right now because he did not restrict travels between South Korea and China? And now, the chaotic situation right now going on in South Korea. Do you think that criticism is warranted?
I think it is warranted, but I would say it's hard to say whether he did that intentionally or not, because of course
we have to share the suffering together with China.
No, okay, maybe he did do it intentionally. That's pretty bad. Yeah, I mean, here's the reality. When it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, they are an opaque system. They are not open with their information. Even the Chinese people, they don't believe the data coming out. They know that the Communist Party lies to them. It's a joke in China. You go on the Chinese internet, they make fun of it.
Really?
The Chinese Communist Party was publishing numbers one day, and the numbers are lower the next day. And they're like, "Oh, it's a miracle. The Communist Party is bringing people back to life." They joke about it. It's dark humor. They know that nothing the Chinese Communist Party tells them is real.
But the people in China, they don't believe what they're spreading out.
And personally, I really doubt that a lot of government officials abroad believe what they're saying. Who doesn't know the Chinese Communist Party is not honest when it comes to information? And so for a government, when it comes to this coronavirus and the spread of this disease, it is a concern, because what are we basing the quarantine times on?
We can't even believe the information that they're putting out. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, how can we assess how to respond to it? And so on one side, I would say that, it is pretty bad they didn't lock down the border, they didn't take stronger measures, because now we're seeing the effects of it in South Korea. At the same time, I would say it's also a product of the way the Chinese Communist Party operates.
And Epoch Times, you work for Epoch Times. Epoch Times has been also on the forefront of exposing the whole Spygate situation. I saw the entire, the connections, the map. What do you think is going to happen about United States Attorney John Durham's investigation about the origin of the Russia collusion? I believe it was a fabrication from the beginning, but what do you expect with that?
We'll have to see. I don't want to draw any hard conclusions. I do think that based on the evidence we've seen, this entire Russia collusion was fabricated. This entire Russia collusion narrative was fabricated. And not only was it fabricated, but there was a lot of actions of questionable legalities that took place in many, many, many areas involving many, many, many people. How well aware each level of that was in terms of how well aware each person at each level was of the broader scandal, we can't say for sure, but we can say that some people had to have known it was fake. And some people knew it was fake and paid for it and spread it, knowing exactly what they were doing. And they threw this country into complete chaos for close to 3 years over this.
You know, I had a short conversation with Sarah Carter. You know, she's an investigative journalist who exposed a lot of this. And she said if William Barr and John Durham do not come with the conclusion that we expect to, or they should be held accountable for that. How can we hold them accountable at this? I mean, if they come out with something that's completely ridiculous and something that we can't accept.
It's going to be hard to say. The American people, now talking to people, a lot of them, the reason they voted for Trump, from what I'm getting, is because a lot of them had lost faith in the American system. They believed it was too corrupt. Trump came out and said, I want to drain the swamp. And so a lot of Americans, they believe the system is corrupt. They believe it has fundamental problems that need to be fixed. And this Russia collusion scandal, these different scandals they keep coming up with that keep getting proven false, are for a lot of Americans just ongoing evidence of the level of corruption in this system. They want to see justice, they want to see that our institutions work, they want to see that law enforcement works, and they want to see that the laws that apply to individuals like us, individuals on the ground, apply also to the people in charge. That you can't have laws that are, rules for thee and not for me. Law needs to apply to everybody. And trust in the American system, trust in our legal systems is going to depend, I think, heavily, whether we can maintain that on how these things go.
Okay, last question. Among all the Americans, I mean, if you count 10 of them, how many people do you think believe that the New York Times and Washington Post, what they're spreading out there, are the truth?
To be honest, I'd say it's hard to say 1 out of every 10 or 2 out of every 10. I'd say the people who still read them generally still trust them, from what I get. I meet guys like that.
It's disappointing to hear.
Yeah. People who read them still trust them for the most part. And, really it is because they do push a certain worldview. And that worldview is one that really supports this entire narrative they push. People tend to read a lot of modern news outlets more for the worldview they push. It's hard to find a news outlet that just tells you what the facts are, which is, what we're trying to do, but it's not easy, honestly. It also means you're going to take a lot of flack because you're saying things people haven't heard before. So it's not easy work, and we're seeing a lot of censorship against guys like us because we are able to say, hey, this is what's really going on, this is what these guys are saying, what they're saying isn't accurate, and then suddenly you have these independent journalists suddenly trying to dismantle these big narratives, and they don't like it. It's so hard to say. There are people who are still, I'd say, following those narratives that I don't believe are accurate a lot of times, but they do believe it.
Do you think New York Times and Washington Post would ever correct their course, in whatever years would take?
Well, it's interesting because after 2016, some of these media did come out and say, we didn't see the Trump presidency coming, we made some mistake somewhere. There's obviously some kind of problem we have that made us miss that there'd be this, that Trump would get elected, basically, that Hillary wasn't going to get 98% of the vote, so some were saying. It caught them by surprise. It showed them that they did not understand the American voters, they did not understand the American system. They moved away from that. They didn't keep up with that initial assessment. Instead, they went more extreme, a lot of them. And so a lot of Americans have seen, I'd say, certain groups and individuals go further and further, I'd say, to this very far left extreme, to the extent that even a lot of Democrats are like, I don't know if I want to follow you guys there, that you're getting a little too far left for me, which is the issue we're seeing now, I think, with the Democratic Party, where they really are 3 different parties at least. They're not a single unified party. They can't find candidates who are united on one issue. This is why you have them fighting against Bernie. This is why you have them fighting against Warren. This is why you have the Squad and Nancy Pelosi trying to deal with them. They have pushed so many narratives to such an extreme that individuals in their party are a lot more extreme than others. and they're having a lot of trouble finding out how to work together because of that. And the media, I think, is in a very similar state.
Can you introduce yourself to our viewers?
I am Joshua Phillip, senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times, also the host of Crossroads, which is one of our new shows.